done that thing, Kate. I've just looked up. We've recorded basically 10 minutes of a podcast without even introducing you. And what started off
Yeah.
there was kind of
Hi.
what was going to be like a
Good
sort
luck.
of a,
Good luck with
oh,
editing.
how are you? Let's catch up. We've kind of shot forward already.
Yeah.
So I suppose
Don't
we
worry,
better
we can recap
introduce you.
Okay.
So welcome to episode 4 of Is Anyone Listening to Me? Welcome to Katy Baggott. How are you, Katie?
I am not too bad. Shocked that it is only the middle of the week as we record this, because it definitely feels like I've already worked a full week when we're only in the middle of it. But other than that, yeah, not bad.
I get that feeling. Let's introduce you through your bio. So Katie's a strategic lead for learning and development for the Royal Society of Wildlife Trusts. She's a qualified to master's level senior practitioner coach, a therapeutic counsellor, and as a family celebrant too. She volunteers as a trustee on the board for Hill Holt Wood and a speaker coach for TEDx in Lincoln.
Yeah.
You are a busy lady. But we've got you on stage to talk about a particular topic because you sort of approached me with this topic. And I think it's brilliant you came to me because I feel slightly, I think embarrassed is maybe the wrong word, maybe a little bit guilty that I realised that you've come on to talk to us effectively about your role as a young carer and the impact that's had on you. And I realised in my 25 years of teaching, I couldn't name a single child I've taught that has been a young carer. Statistically, that's impossible, isn't it?
Yeah, I would
so
have
I
thought
feel
so.
that we've come. So this is amazing because it's filling a gap knowledge for me. It's really highlighting something that I feel incredibly ignorant about, and I feel educators should be more aware of. And there must be a silent mass of young carers out there that are just floating through the education system without teachers being aware. And I'll come to that later on. It's interesting because I feel I should have known about that. That information should have been kind of divulged to me at some point. If there's a young carer who's coming through the system and I've got that person in my class, there's obviously reading about it, huge impacts that can have on a young person. So, I mean, should we start really with your kind of what is a young carer and your story of being a young carer?
I mean, do you know what? When I was young, I probably didn't tell any of my teachers either. And I don't think I was ever really aware of the even the notion of a young carer. I mean, it's worth pointing out for context that I turned 50 last year. So when I was growing up, the term young carer or child carer hadn't even been identified. It wasn't identified till 1993 as even as identifying children as that. And I guess I grew up in a generation of it goes on behind closed doors and we're a family, we're all in it together. So I helped loads, but I never would have at that time described myself as a young carer. And it wasn't something that I talked about at school. I think some of that, especially at high school, was through that desperate need to fit in and not be seen as being too different, but different enough, and all of that you go through as a teenager. And I definitely didn't disclose to any of my teachers, even my favorite teachers. I never would have described myself as a young carer or wanted them to treat me any differently. So I think in a teaching role, it's really difficult because for me, school felt like a sanctuary where I was only there for me. I didn't have to take care of anybody while I was at school, and I was just like all the other kids. So yeah, I'd guess cut yourself a bit of slack. I don't think a lot of teachers do know about it. I think it's a lot better now because there are charitable organisations that help and support, and younger people are much more aware of what that means for them in terms of responsibility. But certainly when I was growing up at school, and my mum was first diagnosed with primary progressive multiple sclerosis when I was only 6. And so I grew up with her from the age of 6 all the way through to when I went to university, gradually helping a little bit more every year, because primary progressive multiple sclerosis means that every year the symptoms worsened gradually. So it wasn't unlike some people that might have trauma or a massive accident or a sudden diagnosis. It wasn't from kind of a normal childhood suddenly thrown into absolute responsibility for a parent. It was a gradual thing for us as a family that we just got more and more used to doing more, like making our own meals, making our own packed lunches, all of those kind of routine things that just felt, in inverted commas, normal to us. So, and that's definitely shaped who I am as a grown up, that I feel a bit bomb proof, that there is no normal. I embrace the weird and the unexpected and the unconventional because I grew up in that sort of, there wasn't a normal really, if that makes any
So,
sort of sense.
no, it makes absolute sense. I mean, so a lot of the sort of reading up on this around this over the past few days, saying that a lot of people are actually young carers are actually kind of unaware that they're a young carer. And it's almost what you're saying, isn't it? It became normative, it became part of your life. So they wouldn't necessarily label themselves as young carer. It's just what they did. And even young people saying, we just assumed this is what everybody did. We assumed that everybody took on these roles in the house. They didn't realise that for some people that, not that it wasn't a choice, but it was a necessity. To get involved with the family life in that way. And for some kids, they just assume that's what happened.
That's really accurate. And I don't consciously remember ever feeling like uncomfortable with it until I was around sort of 13, 14 years of age. And then I remember really vividly actively avoiding telling my friends that my mum was disabled or was using a wheelchair, or even naming the illness. That was the first age I can remember actively hiding it or not wanting to let people know. And before that, I hadn't, because it had just had that sense of, well, you don't know what goes on behind closed doors, so everyone must be doing this same kind of thing. And it was only when I got to that kind of age, I think 11, I went away with school on a German exchange, and so stayed with a different family, and lived in their house with them. And I think that was my first taste of, oh, wait a minute, family life can feel really different when both parents are well and healthy and able to do everything for the kids. But before that, I had no notion of it.
So what do you think brought about that change then at that age? What was that? Was it friendship groups or changing social situations at school, or?
I think a combination of all things. I think probably you become painfully self-aware around that age. I think it was when my mum's symptoms were worsening, and so it was more obvious to the outside world. She'd started using more aids to support her, like wheelchairs, walking sticks, and that kind of thing. And I think I was feeling protective of my home life and my mum, but also horrified that my friends might judge me in some way because my mum couldn't do everything that other mums could do. And so, and it was that kind of age where you start having sleepovers, and, or I did anyway, going and staying at other people's houses. So yeah, it felt just a bit of a head of steam, I suppose, lots of different factors that fed into it. But that, I remember a friend coming to stay overnight, and I consciously built up the courage to tell her that there was something wrong with my mum. And of course, I say of course now, but she was unfazed by it. It made no difference to her really. But I'd built it up in my head as such a point of, oh my gosh, if they find this out, that's it. They're not going to want to talk to me anymore, which I think, whatever that is as a teenager, will generally fixate on something that we think means we won't be accepted by friends or social groups. So yeah, it was a hormone fueled anxiety, I think.
I think you're right. At that age as well, you're constantly fearing a stigma or a label, aren't you? Or you're always seeking to be seen positively by everybody because it's such a difficult time. And was that, do you know, that was part of it, that there would be, considering you're effectively doing something so positive, aren't you?
Yeah.
By taking on that role, but fearing that others will judge you in a negative way.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think when you're a teenager, it's that weird paradox, isn't it? Of, I want to be different and individual and just like everybody else. It's kind of that tension of I need to be seen to be different. And it's no surprise to me that I then went on to I've always followed the unconventional path. So I didn't stay on and do sixth form at school. I went to art college instead. And then when I
Yeah.
went to art college, it was positively encouraged to experiment with how you looked and how you dressed, and you could be really different. And that I felt at home there, because I'd always felt different or other or not the same as in some way. And so I've always sought out social groups or things to get involved with that are not necessarily the conventional path.
Such as Shrek the Musical, as we
Such
were
as,
both,
yeah,
such as we
I
were
could have
both
been a
loosely
pig.
connected to from I could have been a pig.
Yeah,
I was trying to think whether because I remember auditioning alongside you for one of those roles, and I think I did audition for the pig as well,
yeah,
and singing in a German accent,
yeah.
some line about blowing a house down.
It's,
Yeah,
I mean, that's if that's not a title for a future biography, I don't know. I could have been a pig.
I could have been a pig. I did,
Yeah,
and do you think a little bit though, because you're because of the necessity as a carer to sort of obviously there was necessity for structure and organisation and planning and all those sort of
yeah.
things, that maybe home life was very not constraining but sort of like what it was, that you felt the need to, like a little firework, you had to sort of pop out of that and lose that energy and do different things,
Um,
entertain your brain, be different.
yeah, I think so. Well, I think it was just finding creative things to escape with and to.
Mm.
I mean, it's an interesting thing to look back and reflect on now, but when I look at my godchildren and friends' children now, I see how many different out of school activities they get involved with. Um,
Yeah,
and that wasn't a thing that I ever did, because when I got home, I was helping around the house. And so there wasn't that choice to go and join a drama club or, that, um, or or go and join like theatre groups and things like that.
mm.
So I'd lose myself in films and music and um, art. So I had these different creative escape routes, definitely, and I could just, in an instant, transport myself to somewhere else for that balance, I guess.
But sort of an escape route without leaving the house
Yeah,
in those
yeah.
cases almost. Yeah, yeah, I
Mhm.
appreciate that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, did you have a sense? I mean, linking into that, did you? Because I know a lot of the literature talks about this, a lot of the websites talk about this idea of missing out. That you felt like you missed out. It's a bit hard to say missed out on a childhood, but it was a different childhood because of
Yeah.
having to take on that role.
I don't think I did as a kid ever.
No.
I was really fortunate that um, even though my mum was unwell, she was it didn't ever affect her mind or her conversational abilities. And my dad was an incredibly outgoing, joke telling, Irish rooted dad. So it never felt boring or quiet in the house. And we were really fortunate that I had grandparents. Both sets of my parents had their parents that lived in the same city. So in terms of a network of places I could go, um, I used to spend, and I guess now for a young carer it would be called respite care, or a
Mm.
respite break. But I would go and spend a weekend with my gran, knowing that I would just be watching musicals with her non-stop and going out to car boot sales and things like that. So I had moments of uh, escapism and within the care network that our family had. So I never felt I was missing out in that respect. It's only when I've got older and I guess I've reflected on relationships I've ended up in as an adult where I've grown up with quite a conditional understanding of love, that it comes with because you're being good or you're taking care of someone or you've done an amazing task or you're doing something to take care of another person. And that's meant in my adulthood through friendships and romantic relationships. I've through adulthood made some really terrible decisions because my growing up, I didn't know how to differentiate between you could just turn up and spend time with someone, and that was enough. You didn't have to
Mm.
be the person to be in service of them, or rescuing them, or helping them, or providing some kind of, solution or task. And that's been the biggest thing that I've noticed as an adult growing up in that environment, is you're what's referred to as parentified, where the roles are reversed almost. You become the parent and the parent becomes the child in some respects. And that brings with it quite a lot of then odd expectations when you get into adult relationships. That's taken a bit of work and therapy to unpick and go, oh, right, yeah, that's why I do that. So, but I didn't feel like I was missing out, to use your phrase, particularly at all.
Yeah. So I wonder these days, sort of now, there seems to be, when you look online, a lot more organised help available. There are a lot more groups, a lot more charities, a lot more. There's more availability. People are more aware, aren't they? Like a lot of things. There's more awareness. With more awareness comes more help.
Yeah,
and that seems to be a thing, doesn't it? In terms of that, you talk about mental health and things. There seems to be a need to kind of monitor and measure that to make sure that the burden isn't too great, or that these kids aren't burning out, or they're not getting stressed, because that is going to be a natural kind of, for some people, depending on the level of caring, isn't it? It can be a natural outcome for some of those young people. And I imagine it's something that's going to bring up a certain advancing of maturity as well, or needs to advance to become more mature more quickly, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I have only kind of read about it retrospectively, but organisations like the Carers Trust and the Children's Society have put all kinds of research into the identification of young carers, and the identity of young carers, and how best to provide support and respite for them and for their network as well. So there's a lot of support available for schools and people that come into contact with young people. And then I think the onset of things like Comic Relief and Children in Need, where they actively raise money for the kind of centres that support young carers. And now, to say to someone, a young carer, that is a term that we are all familiar with. I don't know anyone that if you said to them a young carer, they wouldn't be able to define loosely for you what that means. But it's interesting, for me growing up, that was never a thing you heard mentioned. And I'm pretty sure if there are people of my generation now with their own children, then their children might well have grown up with the same kind of, well, this is just what families do. We all take care of each other. And that was a real thing. And I guess, curiously for me, if we were looking at definitions, my dad would have been defined as a young carer, because his dad died when he was only 14. And so then he took on the role of the man of the household, if you like, and did a lot to help around the house and support his mum. And young carers aren't just for disabilities or illness, of course. They're any child that's having to take on a parental kind of role. And I think because my dad had grown up with that, well, we don't talk about this to other people, but we find a way to get through. We find a way of coping. We all pull together as a family, and that's how we cope. And so that's the narrative that me and my brother grew up with. It wasn't questioned. It wasn't as straightforward, as we didn't have any kind of rota or plan for who did what round the house. It was just, that's what you did. It's what everybody in the household did. Found new ways of coping with different situations.
And I think it's interesting because I was sort of looking at the literature, looking online at the websites and reading case studies. Obviously, a lot of case studies out there. It's the breadth of things young people are having to get involved with in terms of caring, ranging from a disability or an illness, but also like a mental health problem, ranging through even to sort of dealing with parents who've got drug and alcohol issues. So there's a real kind of range of expectations, isn't there, being put on young people under the age of 18 there. And that's huge, isn't it? I was reading a case of a young girl who was on a website, was chatting about her mum being diagnosed with cancer. And when I was reading it, she was sort of basically being described as an NHS nurse at home, the things she was taking on with intimate care, with feeding, with helping administer drugs, all these sort of things, alongside schooling, alongside a social life, alongside like you say, the difficulties of hitting that age and sort of going through that. So these young people are really up against it, aren't they? The statistics sort of blew my mind as well. I mean, it varies where you read, but they're saying at the moment anywhere between 120,000 young people between the age of 5 and 18 in England alone on the 2021 census defined as young carer, up to 820,000 if you're looking at 11 to 15-year-olds. So there's a lot of kids out there taking on these roles, aren't they? Yeah. And I think look, I felt completely ignorant around it, bearing in mind the fact the number of children I must have passed through my care as a teacher over 25 years and not to be able to identify a single one.
Yeah.
So I think even this podcast alone, every little helps, doesn't it? Just getting that sort of word out there is massively important. But were there positives as well? Do you feel now in reflecting or at the time? Or
I think I mean, the positives are resilience, I suppose, how much more resilient you become. I think I used the phrase before, bomb-proof, which is probably wildly politically incorrect. But yeah, that resilience of rolling with the punches, not necessarily being able to plan for everything, but being really aware of the human condition and that life can throw stuff at you. I think in later life, because I had a mum that used a wheelchair, when it's come to being accepting of other people's differences, when it's come to looking at accessibility of places, it feels like second nature that it doesn't throw me if someone needs to consider how to access a space in a wheelchair, for instance. And so all of that, it's helped me a lot with. Then in my later years, when my mum was much more unwell and I was advocate for her healthcare, it's taught me so much about the adult social care system in the UK and how to navigate that and who to contact. And so I suppose it's a set of skills that I never would have had in any other circumstance in my life. And as a child, I was more naturally nurturing and caring and considerate of others. And still, I'll look for the person that isn't being included to make sure that they are. And that's an instinctive thing, which can in no small part come from being that sense of othered or unconventional. So it definitely came with some positives. And into my career, my mum got to a point when I was not especially old, where the most that we could do was sit and have a conversation, sit and talk, because I couldn't take her out to places. We couldn't go off shopping or all the things that the traditional mother-daughter relationship would be. And so we got great at having really deep conversations and deeply listening to each other. And that is a skill that I think we really overlook when we get so busy with the normal, I'm saying the word normal kind of in italics, if you like. But yeah, the normal parenting dynamic is that the kids are so busy that the parents' role is taking them in cars to get them places and all that involves. And sometimes you can lose that beauty of just sitting and listening to somebody. So that was a huge advantage, that it meant we had massive conversations because there wasn't really anything else that could connect us in the same way.
And I think it's interesting you referred back shortly, a little while ago, to the idea of it being a skill set. And I think what young carers probably need to recognise is the skills that they are going to bring. You talked about resilience as one, but how many other sort of skills are there? There's a sense of commitment. There's a sense of a sense of pride in yourself and ability to do something and follow it through, of giving back to someone. These are very employable skills, aren't they?
Yeah.
And by being a young carer, you're definitely building a skill set for a CV for most jobs, aren't you? Aside, apart from the niche skills you would need for those jobs, who wouldn't want to employ somebody that brings all of that to them, compassion and
Yeah.
resilience and, or even, like you say, sometimes creative thinking, because you've got to think a bit outside the box to be able to carry it through. And maybe maybe that's something that should be recognized by the education system almost, like, almost with I don't know how you would do that, sort of statement or something that could be part of your CV. It's definitely skills that young people are going to develop, aren't they, in that role, I think. And I think that's worth noting, really, as a positive. Yeah. I kind of noted down here that a lot of the literature, it sort of does give a negative feel to it, but is there more of a need to celebrate these young people? What is their celebration day? Because they have got the Young Carers Action Day, which is about awareness, isn't it? Of the need for more help and more finances and more funding. But where is their kind of, I wrote it down here, like, where is their pride? Where is their pride day to go out and say, look at us, we've been doing this, we're amazing.
Yeah.
Is there a need for that, do you think? Or would that be something that
I don't know. And I was very aware, and I don't know if this is the case for anyone who's in that kind of role now, but for me, it came with quite a lot of stigma that I felt like, was I letting my mum down if I went and asked someone else for help? And that's definitely something that recurs even now in a senior role in a job. I still find myself having conversations with my own manager about, I need to learn to ask for help more, because that was something that just I wasn't encouraged to do as a kid, because I was being the helper. So I don't know whether young carers would have any sense of, it isn't about me. It's not about celebrating me, but I'm part of a family unit that does this. And it always feels like quite a quiet responsibility and it often sneaks in. And I know it did for me. I wasn't aware how much I was doing until I was turning up at school with chaotic packed lunches because I was making them on my own. But I didn't realize that wasn't a thing, because I was just finding new ways to help. So I don't know. It would be interesting to delve into with young people. Is it something that they even want to talk to lots of people about? Or are there some young carers that want to keep it as part of their family responsibility, some sort of privacy about it? I don't know. It's a complex one, I think.
And I think you might have just sort of flipped my brain on that a little bit with that term, quiet responsibility, because maybe that is the way that people do like to look at it. This is a responsibility I've chosen to take on, or obviously I'm going to do this, because what else would I do? It's my family, it's my parents.
Yeah,
it's a nice because I think also you sort of alluded there to the idea that maybe you felt like you weren't always doing a good job, almost like it was an imposter syndrome. I don't know. Do you know what
I guess you didn't.
Maybe that's not the right.
I guess you did. I guess what it was, you didn't have anyone to talk it through with. So unlike if you're learning something new, whether it's at school or in a dance class, or you're with your peers and you're able to say, I've done it like this, what did you do? That whole cliche, after exams, the first thing you do when you get out of the room is ask the person that you're closest to, what did you get for XYZ answer? And I guess as a young carer, you don't have that. So you don't know if you're doing it right or wrong. You don't know if you're doing enough or not enough. You don't know if you're helping in the right ways or the wrong ways, if there's more you could do or you should be doing less. It's a constant guessing game because you've got nothing to compare it to. And reading now about the support networks that they have for young carers, I think the biggest power of that is just in knowing you're not alone, and that there's a lot of comfort in going along to meetings where you don't have to explain what you're doing, because everybody in that room gets it without you having to explain. And so you're not seen as different or other or unconventional, because everyone shares that same responsibility. So I think it must still be difficult for young carers, for children, to talk to people that don't have that responsibility and have them deeply understand what they're going through. So it's easier to not talk about it. I know that was the path I took. It was easier just to be a kid at school and talk about the things everyone else was talking about, rather than suddenly saying, anything about what you were doing at home to take care of a parent.
So would you feel there's any advantage? Because part of the conversation here is about sort of like not talking about it. And the other part is about sort of need to kind of get it out there and increase knowledge and raise awareness, because that's got to be a good thing. Would there be any benefits to improving training for people who have contact with young people who may be young carers? Not necessarily just naming these are the people who are young carers in school, for example, but just a more general awareness. I don't think as a teacher, I can't think of any training I've had that's been specifically about young carers. We get training on other things. Maybe neurodivergence would be the type of training we get something on that. But is this not equally as important? Not so that we can focus on individuals, but just so that we're more aware this is going on in our establishment, in our setting.
I guess the awareness bit is so that children who have those responsibilities have still got the same opportunities as other children that don't. And I think that's the most important part of raising awareness. And some of those children are probably going to be more vulnerable than children that don't have caring responsibilities. I think there's a lot to be said for making sure that young carers are taking care of their own well-being as well as other people. And that's where the support network, their teachers, their other family members, the responsibility of looking out for that child's welfare is important. And I guess for those are all things that are included in standard training, but they're not labelled as young carers. Maybe they're they're vulnerable pupils, or their well-being, or looking out for signs of stress or anxiety. And I suppose it's no different to all of that, but enabling schools to be able to identify and support young carers would be a great place to be, so that awareness is there in order to, in the same way it would be for if it was a neurodiversity diagnosis or any other kind of difference. It's just making sure that schools are aware so they can offer additional support if it's needed. And I'm sure all young carers are not the same, in the same way as all neurodiverse kids are not the same. There'll be differences even within their similarities. So it's harder to have a blanket approach to all young carers will get this, because they might not need it. But it's even making space for the conversation, I suppose.
And I guess part of it is like with a lot of, with all kids in a school, we only ever see that sort of veneer on the outside quite often, don't we? And recognizing that when they're presenting in a certain way, it may be because in the case of a young carer, they've had a tough night, or it's been a difficult week, or they're having difficulty managing their time, or they've had to take on an extra burden that particular week. And just being aware of that in the background and maybe empathizing a little bit more, and maybe just sort of putting them some slack is the wrong word, isn't it? But sort of giving them some space if they need it in that. It's recognition, isn't it? Recognition of the need that may be there, and being it's awareness. That's what the awareness is, isn't it? So that you can be aware of maybe dealing with that better. I think that would be quite important. And I do think in schools we haven't. I can't think of training that I've been to. Maybe that's something I should be asking for at school, if I'm honest. Or looking into that. Now you've talked quite a lot about this impacting on your sort of your life in general, and your jobs. A lot of your jobs are around that, aren't they? They're around sort of inclusion, diversity, advocacy, whether that be for an individual or a group or a forest or all sorts of different things. So this obviously has an impact on your sort of career choices as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think when I was at school, I decided I was going to be a teacher, like from a really young age. That's what I decided I wanted to be. And that only and that was the reason when I left school, I didn't go to sixth form, mainly because my school didn't have a sixth form because it was only a really small school, and I had the choice of go and join another bigger high school in order to complete sixth form or go to art college. And because I decided I wanted to be an art teacher, going to art college was the natural route. And ever since then, I think I've always had that will to want to help other people, whether that's through teaching or coaching or tutoring or mentoring. It's been this uh, deep-seated purpose to help other people, which I'm convinced is in no small part a symptom of growing up being helpful. And even when I was in job roles that were not connected to learning or development in any way, I would still find a way to be the buddy of the new people that started, or I would help the team in some way. So I was always finding routes to be the helper or be the person that was helpful. And that's guided pretty much all of my career choices from leaving university to now. And it felt like I was the first person in my family generationally to go to university, and it was something that was really important to my parents that they encouraged me to do it. And having grown up in a household taking care of a family member, that came with a lot of expectation and guilt around, well, if you go into university, you're going to have to really make a success of it because otherwise you could be at home helping. And so that was quite a difficult thing to navigate as a teenager into early 20s as well, the being away from home, not just because it was the first time surviving living by yourself, but that difference as to not have someone around that you were helping to take care of. And then all of my jobs have led me into helping or taking care of or supporting other people. And then you go on all of these training courses that talk about whether it's your North Star or your purpose or what is it that leads you to make decisions. And mine is always around, I want to help other people, and be there to support them. And I guess more especially, even more so for the people that wouldn't ordinarily get it. So even working in corporate organizations, I've never been driven by who's the most senior person that I can coach. What's the greatest hierarchy I could get? I've been much more interested in the graduate recruitments or the grassroots learning or volunteering to support social enterprise mentoring, that sort of thing. So it's driven me in all of my career choices, right through to now leading on adult development for a charity. It's fundamentally helping people and being helpful.
When you look at whether you look at your LinkedIn or any of the other kind of areas where you've got your bias presented together, that is the thread that runs through everything. Because even when because you would say, oh, you're working for Barclays, you're working for Britvic, you're working for Coke, all those sort of things. Yet the thread running through that is often coaching or some sort of assistance role. Or
yeah,
do you think it's almost like it's compelling now? It's almost like do you seek that out, or do you naturally fall into that? Do you think now? Do you just find that role? Is that where you settle?
I think both. I think it's where I feel most driven. So it's what I actively seek out, but it's also, I suppose, playing to my strengths. It's where I feel the most at home, where it feels the most familiar. So a combination of both, I suppose, seeking it out and it just being fundamentally part of the fabric of who I am, that it's difficult to escape from it. So yeah, a rubbish answer, but probably both. Like a proper politician.
But that's an okay answer, isn't it? Because yes, it is part of you, but sometimes you have to seek those opportunities. I know you work a little bit. I know we've had Richard on, obviously, previously talking about, is it Young Voices Matter? Have I got that right? And something else. So you fall into that, with him again on that, and that's something that you're like the old advocate, really, aren't you? It's really quite an important skill to have, isn't it? That there are lots of people in a situation, young people in a situation for whom, like you say, they are maybe a silent group, effectively, where people maybe don't know what's going on, but to give them that chance to kind of voice their experience and give them empower them to do that. And when you described when you were younger and you spent a lot of time in the house, sort of not being able to get out, and people maybe didn't know what was going on. Do you sort of feel there is do you feel there is a story to be told for young carers? And do you think it's important to get your story out there? That's the question, isn't it? How much important is it people hear these stories as a narrative of an individual?
Yeah, I think, I suppose it feels like the phrase normalizing is overused these days, but it does feel like the more you can talk about your experiences of having been through something that feels very isolating, because it can sometimes feel really risky to say it out loud because you're not sure who else is going to say, oh, yeah, me too. And generally speaking, when we share stories or experiences, the way we build friendships and affiliations is with other people going, oh, yeah, that reminds me of I've been there on holiday, or we've done that as well. And so it can feel quite risky to share your story when you're in a room of people going, oh my gosh, what? I don't even know how to wrap my head around that. There is no affiliation or bonding or recognition for sharing that story. Working with young people on the skill of public speaking or sharing stories, it's great to be able to share with them different ways that they could tell that story. So different ways of using words, different ways of sharing emotions, different ways of explaining situations, so that they've got it when they do get the opportunity to speak to people, they can share it in a whole world of different ways. And even just having all of those different techniques to using silences or using different words, then our intent with that Young Voices Matter project is that we're equipping young people with different ways of sharing their story or explaining what's going on, so they're able to do it in a way that feels right for them, and they're not trying to use someone else's language or present it in a way that feels alien to them. I guess that's the overall intent of it.
Podcasts are great for this, aren't they? It's quite a cathartic process to sort of talk about things, and maybe for young people who are carers or who have something else that is equally sort of impacting on their lifestyle as a young person, to be able to talk about that. It's almost therapy, isn't it? I guess you talked about earlier on about sort of having therapy. Did that when you talked about therapy? Do you think that was that directly linked into being a young carer as you got older?
No, so that was part of qualifying to be a counsellor. So
okay. Yeah.
When I set about qualifying to be a counsellor, I'd sort of read the theory of how long it would take and how many hours you had to be in a classroom, how many hours you had to make sure that you'd been a practicing counsellor, how many hours of supervision, all of that. And I'd sort of worked it out that, oh, this looks doable. I can definitely do this. But I'd underestimated the impact of journaling and then having your own therapy. Because a big part of training to be a therapist is undertaking your own therapeutic journey, for want of a better cliche. So you spend a lot of time with a counsellor to work out your own stuff, so that when you do end up as a qualified counsellor, you've worked through the majority of your own past or demons or trauma, so that you're able to help someone else without overlaying what you've been through onto their own experience. So I was wildly unprepared for what that would uncover. And it got me talking about things that I'd just never explored before, like growing up as a young carer, my relationship as a child with my parents, where I'd at a very young age taken on responsibility to be this responsible member of the family, and understood more about life stages. So when I found out first about my mum's illness, I was 6 going on 7 years old. And in terms of development of young people, that's a really formative stage as to when we shape lots of things around responsibility and boundaries. And so all of that was shifted. So the therapy I took on was connected to qualifying as a therapist myself, and it was massively useful. And I've then carried on to do it because it was just starting to help me understand more about why I'd made some of the choices I had, what had led me into self-destructive behaviors, that kind of thing. And all of it was linked very much to the kind of childhood that I grew up with.
Yeah. So worthwhile process then, I guess, and actually part of you couldn't do the counselling without that effectively, could you? I guess then
Yeah.
you have it's something you all have to go through. Maybe something maybe something we should all go through.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I'm a big
It's
believer
a
in therapy being much more effective when it's preventative rather than emergency response. And I guess I view it in the same way that I'd look at going to the gym and doing weight training, that kind of thing. You do that if you do that before you need it, so it's not part of a rehabilitation program, it's going to stand you in much better stead for later in life. And therapy, I think the more, and whether that's formal therapy or, like you say, the cathartic process of telling stories and sharing experiences, I think normalizing that process of just sharing the things. I think it was, uh, it's often been said that the things that feel most personal to us are often the most common. So the deepest, darkest secrets that we have, or the things that feel like a really terrifying moment to share, often are the moments that build the greatest connection with someone else, or we find that lots of other people have experienced the same thing. So whether that's formal therapy or just being more open about shared experiences, I think that kind of not not the no one needs to know what goes on behind closed doors thing, sharing stories and experiences can only be a positive thing.
Do you feel that that's partly cultural, that sort of British stiff upper lip, and when you hear about how Americans and other cultures use therapy, they're much more open about it, much more engaged with it. It's almost part of their routine. Whereas over here, you feel we still have that sort of it's a closed
Maybe.
doors thing.
I think it's varies. I mean, and I'm sure across America it varies state to state,
Mm,
even. I think it's probably even less geographically specific than that. I think it's down to people's frame of mind, and it's whether you view therapy through a medical model lens, whether you see it as it's a solution to something that's broken, or whether you see it as a person-centered approach, which is it's part of the human condition. It helps us to talk about our shared experiences. There's no beginning and end to when I should start therapy and when I should end it. It's just useful to be able to share and unpack experiences. And I think, especially in the UK, certainly connected to NHS, our approach to therapy is often the medical model,
mm.
usually linked to CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, very much an approach that it's roughly around 6 sessions, and you start the 6 sessions, and by the end of it, you'll be fixed. Then I think some of that shapes how we view therapy, and that the word therapy even comes with a stigma of you'll hear people saying, "Oh God, do you need therapy?" It's never said as a compliment, is it?
Mm.
It's but an interesting thing that if you switched it on its head and just said, "Do you need to tell a few stories, or do you need to share your experiences?" which is all you're doing, suddenly that's much more socially acceptable. So I think we've come a long way since I was a kid around therapy and shared experience and normalizing stigma and talking more about mental health and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's particularly British or just part of being grown ups, so called, that there comes this expectation that we just get on with it.
I mean, there is that, and it is kind of a positive way to sort of think about winding down, isn't it? This need to move the labels from
Mm.
whether it's talking about therapy, or whether it's talking about young carers or neurodivergence or whatever you're thinking about, to think, right, how can we make these labels more positive? So when we're talking about these, the conversation starts off positive. We don't look for the positives after we've already delved into the negatives, because it's very easy to do that. I was quite surprised, actually, looking at literature online about young carers, that I was trying to find, but these guys are going to be resilient. They're going to have all these skills. It's, but of course, at the time, in the moment, for these young people taking on this role, of course, it's a challenge. Of course, it's a difficult thing to do. So there is going to be that focus, isn't there? But it'd be lovely to see some of those shifts happening where we can talk more positively. And we are, I think you're absolutely right. Podcasts like this, or other things that are happening, are people seeking to have positive conversations, aren't they? To air about it and to learn about it. I think I've learned a lot, Katy, if I'm absolutely honest. I feel that I genuinely, at the start of it, thought I need to think about this, because I'm sure that in all the time, and even in the settings I'm in now, possibly, there are going to be young people who are carers in one form or another, aren't they? Who are involved in that family life where they're having to do that. So I really appreciate you coming on in that respect.
That's all right. I mean, it's fascinating that I don't know many adults that have been young carers either. And I wonder if that's because I genuinely don't know many adults who have been young carers, or whether they have, but just didn't feel like they should share their experience.
I guess it's, as well, I'm sure it's, and again, I'm talking from a point of ignorance here, because I've not been a young carer, but maybe it is that, this was an intimate family moment, wasn't it? This is something we're doing together. And maybe not feel the need to talk about it, because it's what we did. We did it for the right reasons, and we made the right choices. And there's no need to talk about it, because it's what it was. And I guess if people ask, like I've come on, I'm asking you questions. If people ask questions, did you have any sense of missing out, or those things? Maybe I haven't even thought about that, because that's life, isn't it? You just flow through.
Definitely. But I think anybody, for children and young people, or for families that are experiencing it, even to hear a conversation about it can feel such a moment of connection, and helps people feel less isolated and less alone, reduces the stigma, helps them understand where they can go and look for help and support as well, is massively important.
Or even just to start a conversation. I didn't think about that as a thing, because I haven't done it, and my kids haven't had to done it, and none of their friends have done it. So this is the thing now, and I'm more aware of just a new description of a young person's life. They could be a young carer. So I think, if nothing else, and that comes out of it, that's a positive, isn't it? I really appreciate your time. I also appreciate you, because I read in one of your bios that you can be a bit sweary. So I also appreciate that you
didn't swear at all. I know, I can fit a load in now if you want me to.